I'm Ria, 28, standing under a chandelier worth more than my college degree in a scarlet gown my mother would have called too bold. One hand grips a champagne flute. The other clutches a microphone about to ruin my parents' perfect night. 6 months ago, they forced me into a marriage they called humbling. Their words, not mine. You need grounding after the embarrassment you brought this family, my mother hissed while zipping me into a gown for the wedding I didn't want. This is where you belong now. Spoiler, the man they picked to humble me, turns out he could buy and sell their entire fortune twice over. But let's rewind. Growing up, Ria Langford meant summer villas in the south of France and dinners where elbows on the table earned icy glares. Our townhouse in Georgetown had been in the family for generations. White columns, iron gates, the whole American royalty thing. My father, Harold Langford, turned his dad's 3-property business into a real estate empire. My mother, Celeste, curated our social life with the precision of a military campaign. Cocktail hours were war zones dressed as charity fundraisers. Every word, every smile was strategic. By 8, I could quote Roosevelt. By 10, I was fluent in side-eye and small talk. By 14, I knew which families to be seen with and which to avoid, like salmon, in July. My little sister Ivy, 5 years younger, trailed behind me like a shadow in Valentino Flats. She tried so hard to keep up mimicking my makeup, my voice, even my handwriting. Mom says, I'll never have your poise, she once whispered, but I can learn. That was how we were raised, compliment one daughter while quietly diminishing the other. Then reverse it the next day. It kept us in line, kept us competing, until I broke the pattern. After graduating from Columbia and breezing through an MBA at Kellogg, I was expected to slide neatly into Langford & Langford's PR division, polished, photogenic, obedient. Instead, I pitched my own idea. A designer co-op, I told my father, sliding the pitch deck across his glass desk. A curated boutique for up-and-coming fashion talent. Pop-up partnerships, digital integration. We build towers. Ria, he interrupted, not even flipping the page. We don't play dress-up. It's a market gap in DC, I pressed. No one's doing this at scale, and you want us to bankroll a vanity project? He called it a learning opportunity. I called it mine. For 3 blissful months, Haven Studio was alive. Think Scandinavian lighting, local art racks of unknown but soon-to-be famous designers. I worked 12-hour days. My best friend Sienna handled logistics while I schmoozed clients, managed brand deals, and built momentum. Then boom. I'm so sorry, Miss Langford, the accountant stammered on the phone. There's nothing left in the business account. Vendors hadn't been paid. Orders bounced. Sienna vanished. Turns out she'd done this before. New name, new city, same scam. The Washington Post ran the story under Langford heiress duped in boutique debacle. At every gala after that, I felt the whispers behind sequined clutches. Celeste didn't hide her fury. You've humiliated this family, she snapped at dinner. What kind of Langford falls for a grifter? The answer, me. Within 2 weeks, I lost everything. The apartment, technically owned by my father, reclaimed. Credit cards declined. My black Porsche gone, replaced with a beige Prius older than Ivy. They didn't cut me off completely. That would have looked bad. Instead, they weaponized appearances, assigned me a bedroom in the guest wing, enrolled me in reputation rehab via family connections, aka unpaid admin work at Langford HQ. Every failure of mine became a cautionary tale at brunches and board meetings. I was supposed to feel ashamed. I did, until the solution arrived. Tuesday evening. Celeste's voice sugar-sweet, which always meant danger. Ria, darling, sit down. We've decided what comes next. Across from her sat a man in a gray suit and thrift store haircut. Early 30s, quiet, unassuming, forgettable. This is Cal Weston, she said. He's a financial consultant. His father is Harold's legal advisor, and he's looking for a wife. I laughed. Out loud, is this a joke? No, Harold replied, eyes hard. It's your best option. He's stable, humble, the kind of man who can fix your image. And if I say no, no trust fund, no referrals, no name. My own mother added, your father's heart can't take another scandal. The next 72 hours were a blur of disbelief, rage, and silent stares over breakfast. Cal, ever calm, offered dinner. A basic Italian place, booth seating, red sauce. He drove a Camry, held the door, ordered chicken parm. "Look," he said, after I tried and failed to fake small talk, "this isn't a fairy tale. But I think we could build something that works." "Works," I repeated. "Is that your idea of romance?" "Would you prefer lies?" he asked, not unkindly. "You need stability. I need—" He didn't finish the sentence. I didn't press. His apartment, predictably beige. Books on shelves, clean counters, generic art. It screamed placeholder. Still, when I vented to my ex, Aaron, a hedge fund VP turned wannabe savior, his response wasn't love. It was calculation. "Your family name would still be good for my portfolio," he said, swirling his scotch. That's when it hit me they didn't see me as a person. Just a brand, a headline, a cautionary tale, or a stepping stone. I stood up, paid the tab, walked 10 blocks home in heels that blistered. But the pain was oddly clarifying. I said yes to the arrangement, signed the papers, wore the sensible gown, smiled in photos that felt like mugshots. But what none of them realized that night wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of my plan, and it begins with this microphone. The wedding was tasteful. Not in a good way, more like sterile, curated, and soul-sucking. Celeste had planned every minute of it like a war strategist dressing up surrender as sophistication. No grand cathedral, no string quartet, just a muted garden setup with soft lighting as if even the sun was too embarrassed to shine. I wore a fitted ivory sheath dress that didn't flatter so much as it apologized. My mother had picked it herself. Classic, conservative, appropriate for the circumstances, she'd said, while clipping on a pair of pearl studs that belonged to her grandmother. Translation: don't draw attention, don't invite questions, blend in like a reformed disappointment. I said nothing. I'd stopped arguing weeks ago. There were only 47 guests. Everyone who came either owed my parents favors or were too socially terrified to decline. The real friends I once had. They'd vanished the moment Haven Studio collapsed. My cousin Natalie sent a text that morning, thinking of you. Wish things were different. No RSVP, no call, just empty air. Cal stood at the front, quiet and composed. Same gray suit, different tie. He looked like someone you'd trust to do your taxes, not someone you'd marry. But there he was, offering me a steady hand like this was just another boardroom handshake. "You're doing great," he whispered as I reached him. It was the first time anyone had said those words to me in months, and for a second I almost believed them. The reception was a blur of clinking glasses, awkward toasts, and passive-aggressive commentary. "Marriage will settle her," said one of Harold's golf buddies. "He's got that steady vibe she needs." I overheard another aunt murmur, "She should be grateful someone agreed to marry her at all after that boutique disaster." Every word was a reminder that I wasn't Rhea, the woman who built something, once I was the scandal they all wanted to forget. The wedding gifts were as uninspired as the menu. No luxury kitchen sets or Paris honeymoon vouchers. Just bland throw pillows serving platters and an air fryer. A very expensive, tastefully wrapped air fryer. My parents' big gift, a lease on a third-floor apartment in a transitional neighborhood real estate, speak for gentrifying but still sketchy after dark, and 2 entry-level positions at Langford and Langford. One for me in admin support, one for Cal in finance. It was humiliating, intentional, the kind of move that screamed, "Know your place." That night, we drove away in his Camry. I could still smell the hairspray in my veil. No exotic honeymoon, no romantic getaway. Just a weekend at a bed and breakfast in the Blue Ridge Mountains booked by my mother because every new couple needs time to adjust. The room had floral wallpaper twin beds and complimentary robes that smelled like industrial detergent. Back in DC, we moved into the apartment. 2 bedrooms, no elevator-thin walls. The living room window faced a brick wall with a spray-painted peace sign. The furniture functional, beige. Probably selected by Celeste from some catalog titled Minimalist Modern for Disgraced Daughters. I stood in the middle of the room, hands on hips, taking it in. "It's not a home," I said flatly. "It's a stage set for humility." Cal didn't react. He just unpacked our boxes like this was all normal. "Want to pick which bed you want?" he asked. "Or should we just rock, paper, scissors it?" We settled into a routine. Cal left at 6:45 a.m. sharp every morning for his consulting job at a small financial firm. At least that's what he claimed. I woke up later, made coffee badly, and walked to my assigned job at Langford HQ. I was tucked into a cubicle behind reception where my biggest responsibilities were refilling the printer paper and scheduling meetings for people who used to ask for my opinion on strategy decks. My new supervisor, Monica, loved giving me unnecessary tasks. She'd been at the company for 2 years and had a mild superiority complex. Langford standards are very specific, she told me on day 3, as if I hadn't grown up listening to quarterly revenue calls over dinner. Filing by date won't do. We sort by client priority. Alphabetical, you'll adjust. I nodded. I adjusted. I kept my head down. Evenings were quiet. Cal made dinner most nights. Nothing fancy, but better than anything I could throw together. One night, after I caught the toaster on fire attempting sourdough, he chuckled and handed me a glass of wine. "Don't worry," he said. "Most arsonists don't start with breakfast appliances." It wasn't flirtation. Not really, but it was kind. We talked, but never deeply. Just surface stuff, news, weather work, gripes. He was always calm, always measured, never pried, never pushed. And that made me curious. Because here's the thing. Cal wasn't stupid. He was observant. Too observant. He noticed which bills I forgot to pay. He remembered my caffeine order after one groggy morning. He stayed out of my way without acting distant. And on weekends, he disappeared into his home office, a room that always stayed locked. At first, I assumed he was just a finance guy with boundary issues. But then I noticed the little things. His watch not luxury brand obvious, but rare. His laptop a custom build I'd only seen hedge fund tech teams use. Once I caught him on the phone speaking rapidly about portfolio shifts and acquisition margins. Not exactly junior analyst talk. I started asking questions. He dodged them, so naturally I snooped. One Saturday, while he was at a client dinner, I tried the door to his office. Locked. Not just locked, digitally coded. Who codes a home office door in a rental apartment? That night when he came back, I watched him out of the corner of my eye while pretending to scroll Instagram. He poured himself a scotch, loosened his tie, and said nothing. Just like always. Cool, controlled, boring. Except I didn't buy it anymore. Something didn't add up. And I wasn't about to let myself be the only mystery in this marriage. I started observing. Taking mental notes, his patterns, his mail, even the way he typed. Slow, deliberate, efficient. The man was clearly hiding something. But here's what shook me. One Friday, I came home early and caught a glimpse through the cracked office door before it closed. Bloomberg terminal. Triple monitors. One screen with charts I recognized from a pitch deck I'd only ever seen behind closed doors at high-level investor briefings. Cal wasn't a regular consultant. And whatever this marriage was, it had just become more interesting. I didn't confront him. Not right away. Something about Cal's entire demeanor warned me against playing it dumb. This wasn't some amateur with a side hustle. The precision of his habits, the silence in his moves, it all screamed one thing: power kept quiet on purpose. And if I'd learned anything from my family, it's that people who hide their power are the ones you really need to watch. So I played it cool. Played the role they cast me in the reformed failure too grateful to question her blessings. I smiled at the neighbors. I brought in our mail. I learned how to cook one dish that didn't involve smoke alarms. Meanwhile, I built a digital trail. I started saving everything. His texts, odd bank notifications, missed calls, labeled with just initials. I knew a game was being played. I just didn't know if I was the pawn or the queen. At work, things didn't improve. Monica, drunk on the illusion of authority, kept assigning me tasks that were clearly punishments. I once spent an entire day alphabetizing client brochures only to be told afterward that the filing system had been changed again. Every time I opened my mouth in meetings, someone didn't hear me. Every success was attributed to someone else. I was invisible unless I made a mistake. And yet, I endured. Quietly. Strategically. Because I'd started noticing something. The deeper I faded into the background, the more people forgot I existed. And when people forget you're watching, they get sloppy. I started overhearing things Harold's side deals, a VP joking about laundering client budgets, one board member mentioning something called Project Vireo. I kept notes. I memorized patterns. Because if this whole marriage was a performance, then I was about to become its director. Back home, I began testing boundaries. Small ones. I left the office door cracked on purpose once. Cal noticed within 2 minutes. Said nothing, just closed it. Another time, I moved one of the files on his desk half an inch to the left. The next day, it was exactly where it had been. Again, not a word. But his smile at dinner that night was just a little too polite. Like he knew I was poking the bear and he didn't mind. I started Googling him. The official info was thin. Too thin. No social media, no alumni articles, no LinkedIn. Just one vague mention in a 2017 Forbes piece about emerging market analysts in private equity, but the name listed was Calvin West, not Weston. And when I followed that rabbit hole, I found archived SEC documents referencing a quiet buyout of a family-owned logistics firm, Langford Freight, a subsidiary Harold had liquidated 5 years ago under unfavorable market conditions. Except the document said otherwise. It hadn't collapsed. It had been acquired, quietly, for 8 figures, by someone named C. West. And suddenly everything snapped into place. This wasn't an arranged marriage. This was a hostile takeover disguised as a redemption arc. I wasn't being married off to fix my image. I was being neutralized, contained, pacified. Because someone, maybe Cal, maybe someone behind him, knew that if I ever dug too deep into Langford Holdings, I'd find skeletons. And instead of pushing me out, they'd decided to trap me in. So I adapted. I stopped snooping, stopped poking. I smiled more, laughed when Cal told one of his deadpan finance jokes. I even started bringing him coffee in the mornings, complete with sticky notes that said things like, "Thanks for not killing me in my sleep." And every night, I wrote everything down. A private log password, encrypted, cloud-synced, buried behind a fake recipe blog. Names, dates, transactions, behavior patterns. Internal memos I copied from Monica's desk. Meeting agendas I wasn't supposed to see. Even Celeste's offhand comment at brunch about making sure Ivy's trust stays untouched when Harold was planning to reallocate assets. The more I gathered, the more I realized something terrifying. My entire life had been choreographed. Every mistake I made, every failure they mocked was an opportunity for them to steer me. Haven Studio. I'd pitched it on my own, yes, but Harold had blocked the business loan behind the scenes. The Sienna scam. Turns out she had worked briefly for Langford's legal department years ago. Celeste had known. They didn't just let me fall. They'd orchestrated it. But here's the thing about burning someone alive in public: if they survive, they're not scared of fire anymore. So I started building my exit plan. It began with Cal. I waited for the right moment, an unguarded night, late soft jazz playing from the Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen. He'd just come home from a strategy dinner, loosened his tie, and poured 2 glasses of bourbon. I sipped mine slowly, letting the silence settle. "You ever wonder," I asked, voice casual, "why they chose us for each other?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, you numbers discretion, 0 ego. Me, loud failed, problematic PR risk. Doesn't seem like a match made in heaven." He took a long sip. "Maybe they thought we'd cancel each other out." "Maybe," I smiled. "Or maybe they thought we'd never compare notes." He looked at me then. Really looked. The kind of look that slices through small talk and lands somewhere between respect and recognition. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "But you're not here by accident either." No. We didn't speak for a long time after that. Just sat there drinking bourbon in a room that had started to feel more like a chessboard than a home. And in that silence, I realized something else. Cal wasn't just a pawn either. He was another piece. Maybe even the king on someone else's board. But me, I was about to flip the whole thing. Because I had something none of them expected anymore: freedom disguised as failure. They'd spent so long mocking me, minimizing me, erasing me, that they stopped watching. And while they weren't watching, I'd rebuilt. Quietly, strategically, like they taught me. And the first part of my plan was making sure everyone still believed I had no plan at all. By late October, I had enough data to sink a yacht. A digital dossier on every key Langford transaction going back 5 years, shell companies, off-the-books contractors, asset transfers disguised as bankruptcies. I didn't need to understand every detail. I just needed to trace the patterns. And patterns, I've learned, don't lie. Harold had been gutting the company from the inside while blaming market volatility in every quarterly call. The empire he claimed I'd tarnished had already been bleeding long before Haven Studio. I was never the liability. I was just the distraction. What I didn't have yet was a delivery method. Something public, traceable, and undeniable. And I couldn't tip my hand too early, not while I was still living inside the lion's den. So I kept playing my part. The quiet daughter, the grateful wife, the harmless former heiress trying to earn back her place. But beneath the surface, I was designing a clean exit, one that would leave permanent scars. I started with Ivy. She'd always been the golden child, but lately her shine had dimmed. Her Instagram had turned oddly quiet. No luxury brunches, no selfies at fundraising galas, just throwback photos and vague captions about growth and boundaries. That alone wouldn't have meant much, except I knew Ivy. She didn't post about growth unless something had broken. So I reached out. Coffee my treat. A quiet cafe near Logan Circle. She arrived 15 minutes late, oversized sunglasses, and a nervous smile like someone playing calm and failing. "You look good," I said. It wasn't a lie, just incomplete. She nodded. "You too." Considering. We ordered lattes and talked about nothing for the first 10 minutes, weather movies, some recycled gossip. Then I leaned in, lowered my voice, and said, "What did they take from you?" Her smile cracked, just slightly. "Excuse me, I know that look. The one where you smile like you're fine but your stomach's in knots. You've been doing it since we were kids." She didn't respond right away, just stared into her cup like it might offer better answers than I could. Then finally my trust. It's gone. They told me it's been reabsorbed into the family investment strategy. Whatever that means. I swallowed hard. Not because I was surprised, but because I'd already found the transaction. Her name erased. The funds redirected. Right into one of Harold's dummy LLCs. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. She looked up at me, eyes sharp. "You knew." "I suspected. Now I know." Silence stretched between us. Then Ivy leaned back, crossed her arms, and said something I didn't expect. "So, what are you going to do about it?" That changed everything. Because I realized in that moment I wasn't alone anymore. Ivy wasn't the enemy. She was collateral, like me. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stop being quiet about it. Over the next 2 weeks, we began exchanging information in secret. She didn't know the business side like I did, but she had access. Passwords, calendar invites, emails forwarded by accident. Details no one would bother hiding from the girl they thought still believed in family loyalty. Every piece helped me fill in the gaps. One night, she showed me an email chain between Harold and a Cayman Islands bank contact. The language was vague, but the implication was clear. Langford Holdings was preparing to offshore what was left of its liquid assets, which meant the collapse was imminent. Harold was burning the house down quietly while keeping his reputation intact. That's when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The match had to be lit, so I staged the fuse. It started with a family dinner, one of those quarterly photo op affairs where we pretended to be close so Harold could parade his generational success for donors and shareholders. Ivy and I arrived together, which raised a few eyebrows. Celeste greeted us with a frozen smile and a backhanded compliment. "How lovely to see both of you in one piece. What a rare moment." I smiled back. Yes, it's amazing what shared trauma can do. Cal showed up right after us, pressed shirt, unreadable expression. He kissed my cheek and whispered, "You sure?" I nodded. Everyone else assumed we were still playing by their rules, and that made the next move easy. At dinner, I waited until Harold launched into his usual monologue about legacy responsibility and how the Langford name means something in this town. He always loved an audience. Then I stood up. Glass in hand, calm voice, even tone. I'd like to make a toast. Celeste's eyes narrowed. Ivy looked down at her plate. Cal sipped his wine. I just want to say how grateful I am I began. Truly, for the lessons, the discipline, the relentless standards of excellence. Because without them, I wouldn't be where I am now. Harold gave a stiff nod, already preparing to take credit. So it's only fair I repay the favor, publicly. I pulled out a small USB drive and placed it on the table. Consider this my contribution to the family legacy. A complete archive of financial records, internal emails, and asset transfers you've all worked so hard to keep quiet. The room went still. Harold's fork clattered against his plate. You're bluffing, he said. I shrugged. Maybe, but the Washington Journal won't think so. Neither will the IRS or the SEC. I sent copies, just in case this dinner got awkward. Celeste's face drained of color. Cal still sipping his wine. Ivy smiling just a little. Harold stood up, voice low and dangerous. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I said. For once I do. Then I turned to Cal. Did you know I asked calmly? He met my gaze. I knew what they were capable of. I didn't know who you really were until now. It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning, a nod to a new balance of power between us. I looked back at my father. You raised me to be disposable, so I disposed of you. Then I walked out. No yelling, no breakdown, just silence, the kind that echoes longer than any scream. The story hit the press before I'd even made it back to the apartment. I was still in the Uber when the first alert buzzed on my phone: Langford Empire under investigation for fraud insider trading. Beneath it, a grainy photo of Harold outside the club where the dinner had taken place, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a single evening. The Langford name, once a polished brand of trust, legacy, and upper crust control, was unraveling in real time, headline by headline. I got out 2 blocks early just in case someone was following me. Call it paranoia, or maybe instinct honed from years of learning that even family can turn predator. The apartment felt different when I walked in. Still clean, still beige, still quiet, but sharper somehow. Like the air was listening. Cal was already there, standing in the kitchen, his jacket off, sleeves rolled. He didn't speak, just held up his phone and let it vibrate in his hand. Dozens of unread messages lit the screen. Harold, Celeste, a Langford board member, some lawyer I didn't recognize. A barrage of panic betrayal threats disguised as concern. I guess that dinner really was awkward, he said dryly. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands weren't shaking, but my chest felt like it had caved in slightly. Not from regret, just from release. The tension I'd been carrying for months had snapped. And all that was left now was silence and wreckage. Did they know you were in on it? I asked. He shook his head. They think I'm the casualty, the one who got duped by a bitter wife. And are you? He tilted his head. Do you want me to be? Fair question. Because the truth is, I didn't trust Cal. Not fully, not yet, but I respected him now, and maybe that was more useful. They underestimated me, I said, setting the glass down, because they always did. And you watched. You didn't stop them, but you didn't stop me either. I was gathering data, he said. Same as you. For what? His eyes didn't flinch, to see who deserved to win. And just like that, the chessboard had changed again. We didn't talk about alliances. We didn't hug. We didn't toast to the destruction of an empire. We just sat in the quiet, 2 people who'd been forged by the same fire, recognizing in each other what no one else had: endurance. The next morning, the fallout began in full. Langford Holdings lost 18% of its value in a single day. Clients pulled out. Investors demanded answers. A formal investigation was launched. Harold released a statement blaming unauthorized internal access and manipulated records, which was laughable, considering the paper trail I'd left was airtight, time-stamped, and corroborated by more than just me. Ivy gave her first interview the following week. She didn't name names, but her words were surgical. Sometimes we don't realize we're in a gilded cage until the gold starts peeling, she said. Then all that's left is the rust underneath. Celeste tried damage control, hosting a charity event for displaced women in business. Half the attendees boycotted. The other half posted passive-aggressive captions about irony. Meanwhile, I vanished. Publicly? At least, I submitted my resignation to Langford HQ by email. One sentence. No explanation. No goodbye. Monica replied with a typo-riddled message about professionalism and protocol. I didn't bother opening it. Cal forwarded me a news article about her demotion 2 days later. I stayed offline. No press, no statements, no clapbacks on social media. Let them invent their own narratives. Let them guess what came next. I wasn't interested in proving anything anymore. What mattered now was the exit, and it had to be clean. I took the money Ivy and I had quietly recovered her original trust, now rerouted to an independent account, plus a sliver of an investment fund I'd discovered buried in Harold's old property holdings. Not enough to rebuild the Langford name, but more than enough to start something without it. I sold everything else. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, all gifted under the pretense of love or legacy. Gone. I kept one necklace, a thin gold chain with a tiny compass charm. Ivy gave it to me after the toast. "So you never forget where north is," she'd said. I haven't taken it off since. And Cal, he stayed. Not out of obligation, not even for strategy. Because one night, as I packed the last box, he walked into the room, looked around, and asked, "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet." He nodded. "Then and say, and I'll drive." We didn't need a contract anymore. We'd both served our roles, exposed what needed to be exposed, played the long game. And in the end, the alliance held not because we were in love, but because we were the only two who knew the truth. Power isn't something you're handed. It's something you take when no one thinks you can. We left DC at sunrise before the city was fully awake. I didn't look back. Not once. We didn't settle. Not at first. For weeks, we just drove, no destination, no plan. Highways became our rhythm. Gas stations became landmarks. I let the landscape blur by in silence, letting each exit sign feel like an exhale. Cal drove most of the time. He didn't talk much, which worked for me. The world outside had been loud for too long. The calm felt earned. We stayed in places that didn't ask questions. Roadside inns, rental cabins, small-town Airbnbs run by old couples who left banana bread on the table. I slept like I hadn't in years, deep, heavy, dreamless. No nightmares, no anxiety jolts, just space. In the beginning, I thought I needed revenge. Something cinematic. Something that would haunt them. But what actually came was quieter than that. No grand collapse, no courtroom drama, just headlines that got smaller, phone numbers that stopped working, a family name that went stale like bread left open too long. I didn't need them to suffer. I needed them to vanish from the architecture of my life. We ended up in Vermont. Not by design, just momentum. A lake house with chipped paint rented month to month. It had a wood stove and a wraparound porch that creaked in the wind. Cal bought groceries. I read every book I'd never made time for. Some mornings we hiked, some days we didn't leave the couch. The rhythm became its own form of healing, boring, gentle quiet. He never asked what I wanted next. He waited. And when I finally said it out loud, it surprised even me. I want to build something again, but without a name to protect me, without someone else's money cushioning my fall. He nodded. "You're not afraid it'll fail." "It might," I said, "but at least it'll be mine." That's the thing they never teach you in families like mine. The cost of inheritance isn't just obligation, it's erasure. You learn how to wear the brand, but never how to own yourself. The minute you question it, you're labeled ungrateful, dramatic, disloyal, and the more you comply, the more you disappear. But I stopped disappearing the moment I chose the truth over their version of it. The new business didn't have a name at first. Just an idea scribbled on scrap paper, a consulting firm for women-owned startups. No branding, no PR spin, just mentorship, funding strategies, and tactical advice from someone who knew what it felt like to have it all crumble. Ivy joined 6 months later. She left DC too, not in scandal, but by choice. She rented a small flat in Boston, started grad school, and slowly rebuilt the version of herself that had never gotten to exist. She's the one who came up with the name Northlight Advisory. "It's quiet," she said, but anchored. We laughed about it for 20 minutes. It stuck. By the time the Langford lawsuits fully unraveled, we were already off-grid. The government froze 2 of Harold's holding companies. Celeste tried to shield her personal accounts, but failed. There were depositions, appeals, headline cycles, and then silence. No one wanted to admit they ever followed the Langfords. The same people who used to brag about our family tree now claimed they always had a weird feeling. I didn't say anything. Didn't post. Didn't respond to the one desperate email Harold's assistant sent asking if I'd reconsider an internal resolution. My reply was one sentence, "There's nothing internal about the damage you caused." That was the last time I heard from them. Cal and I grew into something unexpected. Not lovers, not quite friends, but partners. Co-conspirators in the quiet rebuilding of our lives. He eventually took on 2 advisory clients of his own. Nothing flashy, just efficient and discreet. He still has his triple monitor setup in the guest room. Still locks the door. I don't ask anymore. Some secrets don't need digging up. We don't wear rings. We don't celebrate anniversaries. We just stay. And that's louder than anything else. One night, while we were sitting on the porch, wine in hand, wind tugging at the edges of my blanket, he asked, "Do you miss it?" The name, the noise, the power. I didn't answer right away. Just looked out over the lake at surface so still it mirrored the sky. "I used to," I said. "I used to think I needed to reclaim it, rewrite it, prove them wrong. And now I just don't want to become them." He nodded like he understood, because he did. I still get recognized sometimes. At coffee shops, at airports. Once at a book signing for a female entrepreneur I'd helped launch. A woman leaned over and whispered, "You're her right, the Langford daughter." I smiled. Not anymore. And I meant it. Some stories don't end with a bang. Some end with a whisper that grows into a life. A small business. A porch that creaks. A cup of coffee you made yourself. Peace isn't flashy. It's earned moment by moment. I never got an apology, but I got the last word. And maybe, just maybe, that was better. Story 2. Toxic parents that cut me off and threw me out when I was 18. Tried to sue me for $50,000 that I never stole after showing up to my son's birthday party to plead for money. Hello, everyone. Thus, 3 days ago, I celebrated my son's 3rd birthday. Most of our co-workers with children were there, along with a few of my son's daycare buddies and their parents. After they called me 2 weeks ago to ask if they might meet with me to patch things up, I also asked my estranged parents to the celebration. I don't get along with them, which makes sense given the past. To make it even more memorable and poetic, my parents expelled me 10 years ago, just a few months before I was set to begin college. Additionally, they made sure to expel me on my 18th birthday. My parents were never very affectionate or considerate. I would say that I was largely disregarded and unwelcome during my early years, and the only reason my parents didn't expel me before I was 18 was probably because it would have been against the law. However, they acted on their first opportunity, and I wasn't shocked that they were evicting me. The fact that they were doing it on my birthday just a few months before college started astonished me. They were adamant about what they wanted to do, so I attempted to persuade them to let me live with them until I graduated and paid for my tuition. In order for them to do as they pleased, they wanted me out of their lives. So far, rather than squandering their time caring for me. As long as they had me to take care of, they couldn't afford the financial risk of starting their own business. They also intended to drive an RV across the entire country. The plan was excellent. Though not at the expense of my future, I had nothing against what they intended to do. I made an unsuccessful attempt to persuade them to alter their plans using every manipulation technique in the book. I even broke down and started weeping. However, that also didn't help. Additionally, they informed me that I had 1 month to leave the house and figure out how to pay for my own costs. After my parents' chat, I made the decision to leave and spend the money I had been accumulating for a vehicle while working as a cashier at one of the local mall's businesses. Despite having little, I was furious with my parents. They have never really appealed to me, but after my birthday, I detested them. I thus texted every one of my relatives to ask whether they would be prepared to assist me over the course of the following 2 days. Unsurprisingly, the most of them abandoned me, which was a major factor in the fact that I had never previously talked negatively about my parents, since I had never had someone to rely on. Although my pals were pleasant, they had their own lives and didn't want me to stay and live with them. However, I'm fortunate that Uncle Kevin, a cousin of my mother, and one of my distant relatives replied to my email and invited me to move in with him. However, I must make myself useful while I'm here. All I needed was a place to stay before I packed my things and headed to Utah to live with Uncle Kevin. My parents didn't ask, and I didn't tell them anything. They probably didn't care that I didn't say goodbye to them one final time before I went. Uncle Kevin was a kind man who asked me to assist him with many household tasks, but it wasn't impossible. He also owned his own cafe, which was well liked by the people. He offered me a job there as a cashier for the time being, and he would cover my tuition provided I was honest and hardworking. He was a little out of the ordinary, but he was making a lot of money from his grandparents' estate, and because he didn't have any family of his own, he could afford to buy these kinds of items. And by working hard and demonstrating to my uncle how serious I was at the cafe, I was able to pay for college. To be honest, I offered to start paying him back when I graduated and moved out, but he told me not to worry and promised to recover his debt when I became a greater success. He was lovely, yet strange. Unfortunately, he died of a stroke a few years after I departed, so he never came to collect his dues. It happened quickly, and it was already too late when his maid brought him to the hospital. I appreciate all he did for me, and I will always be appreciative that he was able to substitute for my parents at my wedding and be there. My parents were never able to find out where I spent those years or who paid my tuition since Uncle Kevin never really got along with his family, including my mother, either as a child or even as an adult. Or perhaps they simply didn't bother to get in touch with me after learning about it. In any case, until a few weeks ago, I didn't hear from my parents at all after leaving their home. Since they had heard from others that I was now married and even had a 3-year-old boy of my own, they informed me that they had discovered me on social media thanks to a relative who assisted them in finding me. In their message, they expressed regret for what they had done years prior and said they would now want to visit me and make amends, mostly because they were eager to see my kid and wife. Within a day of that message, they sent another one stating that they were eager to meet their grandchild while they were still living, which I found to be incredibly pathetic and nearly ignored. It was clear that they were attempting to manipulate my emotions. However, I consented and invited them to visit on my son's birthday. Although I didn't have any specific plans, my wife told me she didn't mind having the messages over as long as I was cool with it after we spoke and discussed them. We've been married for 5 years, and she is aware of everything their past. 10 years have passed since my parents expelled me. She advised me to invite them if I thought it was water under the bridge. She was raised by her grandparents, both of whom had died within the past few years after her own parents died when she was quite little. She clearly wanted some family to attend the celebration based on this. Although I didn't care about reconciliation, I had the impression that my wife genuinely desired them and was keeping it to herself since she didn't want a powerful army involved in any situation. For my wife's sake, I did invite my parents, and they showed there an hour ahead of schedule on the day of the celebration so that we could spend some time with alone. We made an effort to strike up a conversation despite how uncomfortable and awful everything was. I would then present them to my wife and son. For the most part, they were kind and considerate. However, my wife once went into the kitchen to prepare tea for my dad. My mother then informed me that she was come to talk about something else. Additionally, they had invited her for tea since she didn't want to say anything in front of my wife. My parents apologized to me once again when it was just the 3 of us. They claimed they had changed their minds, that they had done whatever they wanted to, and that they felt they had mistreated me as a youngster. I felt that they had finally begun to treat me like a human being, and that their apology was rather kind. However, they told me that they now required money, which was a big part of why they were here at the moment before I could personally accept their apologies. It seems that during their trip, they spent a significant portion of their funds, and now they were having trouble making all of their monthly payments on time. And one of my life's aides, they were aware of my wife's and my relative wealth. We were comfortable and able to assist them because I worked in a bank and she was a real estate agent. That really annoyed me, as it made everything they had said to me seem like a ruse to get me to give them money, which made me uncomfortable. They would even try to soften my feelings for them by using their grandchild as a tool. My wife had fell for it, even if it hadn't worked that well on me. I didn't blame her, since she was eager for us to mend our connection because she didn't realize how terrible my parents were and because she missed her family. However, I wished I had never invited them. My wife came in shortly after with coffee for the rest of us and tea for my dad, and she appeared quite delighted, so I didn't say anything to them at the time. I simply remained silent, and my mother advised me to give it some thought. My wife did ask me what we've been talking about, but I told her that I didn't want to argue with my parents, so we would discuss it later. Approximately the same time that the visitors were expected to begin showing up. For the following several minutes, my wife continued to speak with my parents, and since she seemed to like them, the discussion flowed easily. But I simply wanted them to go so I wouldn't lose it over them, so I sat there calmly. Fortunately, the first visitors showed up just on schedule, and I seized the chance to divert my attention. I occupied myself with my kid and the party planning once the guests arrived, and when it was time for my son to cut the cake, everything went smoothly. Everyone enjoyed themselves. I was going to follow my wife into the kitchen when my parents interrupted and asked me again whether I had made up my mind. I yelled at them, telling them to wait in the living room with the rest of the visitors and that I would notify them as soon as everyone had their slice. After my parents halted me outside the kitchen, I took a position in the center of the living room and began with a speech I had been mentally composing. Since no one had ever met my parents before, I presented them to the other visitors, and they were happy that I was taking good care of them. But as soon as I moved on to the next section of my speech, where I began telling them about my early years and how they had expelled me, forcing my uncle to take me, and the smiles left their faces. Everyone laughed a bit when I wrapped it up in lighthearted quips, but my wife maintained a poker face the entire time, and my parents were embarrassed. I talked about how I hadn't spoken to my parents in 10 years since they had expelled me. Finally, they reached out to me lately to see their grandchild, but I nearly blocked and ignored them. However, I then had second thoughts, since I was just thankful that my parents weren't as horrible as other parents. I managed to pass it off as a joke when I had my money. In order to preserve the birthday atmosphere, I had managed to make the entire speech sound like a stand-up routine, so I sat down with the guests again as my parents giggled uneasily. My folks were the first to go when the visitors began to depart after a while. The last thing I wanted was to quarrel with them right outside the home, so I was grateful that they didn't say anything when I saw them leaving in a hurry and giving me the meanest looks they could. I eventually got a chance to speak with my wife and tell her everything after the visitors had left, and we had put our kid to bed. However, she snapped at me before I could respond, calling my remarks pointless and foolish. I had to make sure that none of the visitors were uncomfortable and apologized to my parents for making fun of them without cause. I halted her there and explained to her why my parents had come, but she stated she didn't give a damn, claiming that my speech had destroyed our son's birthday and made it all about me. Since our son was just 3 years old and it wasn't like he would even remember any of this in a few years or even a few weeks, I felt it was unfair. By the manner I narrated the tale, the visitors just thought it was humorous. Despite the fact that it was my son's birthday and not the right time for any of what I had done, I felt compelled to tell my parents how awful they were as people. None of it pleased my wife, who insisted that I apologize to everyone for my inappropriate behavior. That day, I was already under a lot of stress from my parents and my wife's outbursts over something that didn't even upset anyone else. However, I didn't like it. Even after she had learned the reason my parents had come here, I felt as though she was completely dismissing my thoughts about this circumstance. I yelled at her as well, telling her that she had asked me to bring my parents. Therefore, if anything, she ought to be the one showing some empathy at the moment. However, I referred to her as self-involved because she was only reflecting on her feelings. After I lost my temper, she began to weep and I felt terrible about it. I still do too. She dismissed my attempt to console her right away, accusing me of being hypocritical and self-centered. She also refused to talk to me until I apologized to everyone who had come to the party. She has been sleeping in the guest bedroom ever since she transferred all of her nighttime belongings there. I haven't apologized to any of the guests yet, so we haven't spoken since that evening. I believe my wife is overreacting to what transpired at the party, but I don't think anything I did was inappropriate. My parents still haven't responded, and no one from the party has commented on my speech either. She seems to have it all worked up in her mind and believes that people will condemn us for it, but that isn't the case in this instance. And she simply won't talk to me at all, so I can't even tell her that. Additionally, I believe that she is not making an effort to comprehend my perspective, since I have already disregarded my parents in order to keep the peace before the party and for the benefit of my wife. But they were placing too much pressure on me, and I simply couldn't handle it again. And it was most likely accurate what I had mentioned about my wife warning my parents more than I did at the party. When I brought it up during our disagreement the night of the party, she didn't deny. No one gives a damn as much as my wife, who has been behaving as though I completely destroyed the party. Since I don't believe I done anything wrong, I don't want to apologize to anyone. Even though I made an effort to do everything correctly, things didn't work out in the end. I believe it was entirely justified for me to embarrass my parents at a party after they repeatedly attempted to defraud me by requesting financial assistance after they had booted me out at the age of 18 and abandoned me for 10 years. I made an effort to remain composed and only became upset when my parents went too far. And I really believe my wife should be aware of it. I suppose I can say I'm sorry for referring to her as self-involved. That wasn't cool, but I feel like that's the best I can do. I don't think I have anything to apologize for other than that. I might even think about saying I'm sorry to the visitors, but not to my parents. I thus came up with the idea to make a speech at my son's birthday celebration in order to make fun of my parents who had requested me for financial support after they had expelled me and cut me off for 10 years. One update. I thus discussed this with my wife today. I decided to just say screw it and talk to my wife, since that's how the marriage will operate anyhow, even if there was a lot of disagreement in the comment area of my initial article about what I should have done. 6 days have passed since the party, during which time they have slept in separate rooms and not spoken to one another. For the benefit of our kid, we made an effort to keep things low-key, but as he is still too little to understand these things, there was even less justification for us to speak to one another. However, I informed her that we really needed to chat today before we left for work. Fortunately, she didn't ignore me, and we were able to have a quiet conversation while our kid was eating breakfast in the adjacent room. I apologized to her for referring to her as self-involved, but I didn't see any other justification for my apology. She thought I had ruined the celebration for everyone, but I didn't. And because no one has yet to bring up the speech with me, no one even gives a damn. Not even my folks. I waited for her to answer after telling her in the most kind and courteous way possible that I thought she had overreacted a little. She acknowledged that she had overreacted and claimed that when her rage over what I had done had subsided for a few days, she had come to the realization that she had acted selfishly and had not given my feelings any thought. She also admitted that while she hadn't stated it out loud, she had kind of forced me to ask my parents to get back together. She was the one who genuinely wanted a happy family for us. Therefore, she had been attempting to sway me non-verbally as we were talking about the notion. It turns out that I was correct about it. She also expressed regret to me for it. When I look at it emotionally, her arguments were really good, since all she truly wanted was for us to have a whole family, which she had never really had as a child. As a married lady, she had intended to receive a portion of it. Her in-laws were peculiar here as well, so her kid would never be able to experience the same kind of love and devotion from his grandparents that she had been fortunate enough to get. Because her parents died so young, she never had the affection she deserved from them when she was a child. Now her kid would have the love of his parents, but he would never have grandparents to support him. She had been raised by her grandparents following the death of her parents, so it was obviously very significant to her. She said that she had spazzed out the other day because of all these problems and her urge to have a whole family. I also expressed my regret for not talking to her about these matters and for the communication breakdown that ultimately resulted in this situation. To put it briefly, we discussed the situation and ultimately decided that treatment would be the best course of action. We now attend individual treatment, but for some additional unconnected reasons, we are also going to think into couples counseling. I appreciate all of your remarks, everyone. Update number 2. I made an update here yesterday, and while I truly didn't anticipate returning so quickly, I am. I'm grateful to my parents. They filed a lawsuit against me saying that I had taken $50,000 from them before I fled 10 years ago, and they wanted the money returned now that they had finally found me. All of it is obviously untrue, and I feel bad for the fool who has decided to become engaged in this as a lawyer. Someone must be in dire need of money since I can't think anybody would consent to this otherwise. In any case, I've already been in touch with my lawyer and will clearly not put up with any of this bullshit. After seeing the true nature of my parents, my wife retracted all of her remarks that I needed to apologize to them. Since I was somewhat kind on them when they first arrived, I'm sure they still believe they can get away with this. However, since it was my son's birthday at the time, they will know that I just acted appropriately. I have no cause to consider the repercussions at this time. I'm going to put everything about this online so that everyone is aware of both what they've done to me in the past and what they're attempting to do now. The third update. I thus uploaded everything, and my Facebook page now has every data I previously disclosed here. I haven't gotten any messages or calls in the last 20 minutes, but I'm waiting since I know that people will be upset and test me. Particularly when I said that no one in my family had adopted me. However, now that I'm in a somewhat good position, everyone treats me with courtesy. I've never extended an invitation to anyone. To be clear, however, my relatives who used to reject me have changed their ways in recent years and are making a phony effort to get along with me. They obviously have their own types to consider right now, and having a well-connected cousin who works in a bank and can help them get employment doesn't hurt. I can now be certain that everything will go down. All I'm doing is waiting for them. The fourth update. Hello, everyone. My folks went crazy after I wrote that post and contacted me furiously many times to attempt to get me to take it down. I'm back after nearly 3 days. However, I didn't pay attention until they texted me to say they would drop their case. All I needed was it in writing, and now I have it. I was then barred by them. The actual nastiness came from my relatives, whom I specifically addressed in my article. They were so offended that they left unkind comments about my wife, me, and even my son beneath the post, which only serves to support my claim that they are awful, self-centered, and foolish people. I thought it was extremely backward that their children had the grace to apologize for their parents' behavior. However, some folks at least possessed intelligence and class. Although I've now removed the post, many people have already seen it, so I'm happy that everyone who previously disregarded me received their karma. In summary, the parents decided to drop their case. I returned to my family. I'm still going strong with my wife. I appreciate your presence, Reddit, but I believe it's time for me to take a vacation. Putting an end to it. Bye.